Welcome to Pillar Talk with Rochelle, where authentic people share real stories focusing on one of the 12 pillars in my book, Simply Complex, Leading Out of Authenticity. I am your host, Rochelle Armstrong, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing this morning?
I am blessed as always. It is a beautiful day, a beautiful morning, and I get to wake up doing the thing that I love, which is helping people to manifest their greatness.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm so honored and excited to have you on the podcast today. But typically what I like to do is give the audience a little background about how me and the guests either know each other. Sometimes I don't know the guests at all. And so I'm just going to share some context as to our relationship and how we got to know one another.
Awesome.
And so Robert and I, we're part of a group called Creative Collaborations. And we met, how many years has it been now?
It's almost 3 now.
Yeah, so it's been a while. And a couple of years ago, I think it was pre-pandemic, actually. So I'm going to say
it was
years ago. He had me come on his podcast. Now let's go ahead and plug in and give a shout out to your podcast. Give them your name.
Why, thank you. The podcast is the Legacy Leader Podcast, and it is just a podcast where we talk about leadership dynamics, leadership stories, and how people have made their leadership journey. Because I think oftentimes those that are good at leadership make it seem as if they're not doing anything. And so we try to dispel that myth and make sure that people understand that it's a struggle, it's a journey, and it's a marathon, not a sprint to get there.
And let me tell you something about Robert. When it comes to language, he be dropping gems. Like he is just, I really respect him as a peer, but also as a leader because he's sharp and he just knows his stuff. But I wanted to share the story about the time I was on his podcast because I've come so far since then. So it was funny that evening, my daughter had a basketball game. So I was rushing to get home. Now, keep in mind, I was not a social media person at all. And I'm still not anywhere an expert. Like I'm still a novice. So it takes a lot of work for me to do this. But this particular day, like I was zero. And so I'm trying to log into the podcast. And it was also Facebook Live, wasn't it? Y'all, it was a mess. So look, so one of the reasons why I make sure I sit at my desk during the interviews is because I have everything set up here so that I don't have to hold a phone. Because guess what I did during Robert's interview? Literally the whole time. Can you imagine holding a phone like this while you're trying to record an interview? Hot mess. But we made it through.
And it was an amazing interview.
You're gracious. You are so kind. But so now, as I stated previously, it's a super honor and I'm truly humbled to have him on my podcast, Pillar Talk. And so, Robert, now that I shared a little inside information about how you and I met and some of the interactions we've had, tell our guests a little bit about you.
All right. Well, thank you again for having me here and being able to talk to your guests. I tremendously appreciate this opportunity. You know that I think so highly of you, Rochelle, and the work that you do and the heart that you have for people and for leadership. And so to be able to be a guest on your show is just a blessing. Who I am, my name is Robert Heath Sr. I am the founder of the Legacy Leadership Consulting Group. I'm also the president and CEO of Legacy Empowerment Academy Companies. We do a number of different things. We have a financial services company. We do work in self-defense and martial arts and some other things like that. And so one of the things that I like to tell people whenever I'm kind of introducing myself is kind of my foundational belief, what the core is and why we do what we do. So what I believe is that every person on this planet is here for a reason, that we all have a divine gift within us, and that our job as we matriculate through life is to manifest that gift, manifest that greatness into the world. The greatest gift that you can give the world is to be who you were designed and intended to be your authentic self. And I think that oftentimes what leadership is kind of pegged as in the world is this focus on getting things done. And what my company's goal is to change the definition of leadership and the concept of leadership from about what leaders get done to about who leaders impact. And that's why our company is called Legacy Leadership. It's about what happens after you're gone. And the idea is that we believe that leaders are here to facilitate the manifestation of greatness in others. The whole purpose of leadership is to see the greatness that is in someone else and to make it easier for them to manifest that, because the entire world benefits when people are manifesting their greatness.
Woo! Okay, first of all, I almost forgot that we were doing the podcast because I got so engrossed in your conversation and how you were explaining what it is that you do. And Robert, go ahead and give your contact information. So if people want to retain your services, let them know how they can reach you.
Oh, yeah. So the best way to reach me is to reach out to me via email. It's Robert@legacyleadershipmastery.com. Again, that's legacy, Legacy, leadership, Leadership, mastery, mastery.com. That's the best way. And then you can also find me on my website at legacyleadershipmastery.com as well.
Yeah, and Robert, thank you for sharing your information. But I had an opportunity to do like a free consultation with him. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can't afford him yet, because I'm new to this entrepreneurship and I'm trying to get to the level that he's at. But one day, because every coach needs a coach. Mm-hmm. And so I want to make sure that we're clear that even if you're good at what you do, I know there's a lot of life coaches and there's a lot of professional coaches, clarity coaches, etc. Mm-hmm. But just like therapists need a therapist, we too need coaches. And so I'm big on, I'm a proponent rather, of mentors, just having a coach and or a therapist. And so, yes, if you are interested and if anything that Robert is saying resonates with you, please reach out to him for his services. And so, Robert, now that we got all that out the way, I'm ready to get into this interview. What about you?
I'm loving it. I just want to say one thing for your listeners, let them know that you can have a free strategy session with me. There's no cost. And even if we don't decide to work together, in that strategy session, you're going to get clarity on your next steps on the things that you need to do. So I want to extend that to all of your listeners. And again, they can just get that by emailing me and I'll send them a link to get on my calendar.
Love it. Love it. So now I'm going to shift the conversation, and we're really informal here on Pillar Talk. And so we like to just kind of get into your business, meaning I kind of like to get into your business. And
I'm an open book.
And the purpose of that is really for other people to glean from your story. And I like to have different people from different backgrounds and different experiences, because you never know what message or whose message is going to reach a particular person or population of people. And so it's been amazing. Like, so many guests have been on here, and I've heard some amazing and powerful stories that I've learned from that has inspired me. And I believe this interview would be no different. And so, Robert, you selected SelfWorth. So what I like to do is give the guests an opportunity to take that pillar in whatever direction they want to take the pillar in. Typically, I lead with, how has that pillar shaped you? Negatively,
great question,
and or positively. Let's talk about it.
All right. I love it. And yes, I selected SelfWorth. And one of the main reasons that I selected SelfWorth, I don't know if any of your listeners are out there that have dealt with this, but I know that I am a card-carrying, recovering perfectionist, right? My name is Robert, and I used to be a perfectionist. And one of the big things that I know that I struggled with a lot growing up and even into my adult years was a situation called imposter syndrome.
Yes.
And for those that don't know, imposter syndrome is something that affects, generally, interestingly enough, kind of counterintuitively, high achieving people. And what it is a situation or a belief that the accolades and the praise that you receive from external sources, the external validation that you receive, is undeserved. And that at any moment in time, the other shoe can drop and everyone will figure out that you are a fraud, that you are not actually as good as advertised. And that was something that really stuck with me a lot in my earlier life. Now, just to give you a little bit of context, a little bit of background, I grew up, I was always a pretty good student, a pretty smart kid. I won't say a good student. I actually didn't get good grades, but I was I was a smart kid. And so I skipped fifth grade. I graduated high school when I was 16. And then I went to the University of Illinois, where I got my bachelor's degrees in economics and speech communications. Now, all during this time, part of what was plaguing me was the fact that while I knew I was smart, I also wasn't ever getting straight A's. And I didn't get straight A's because I hated doing homework and I hated doing all the extra stuff. I was like, why do I need to do all this work if I can come and take a test and get an A? Obviously, I know what I'm supposed to know. I didn't understand how to operate in the system. And what that created for me was a negative feedback loop, because what was in me and what was powerful about me that everybody would see, and people would talk to me about this all the time, but because I didn't fit in necessarily to the strict format of what a good student was, it would undermine my idea of my identity, my idea of my self-worth. And so as I got to college, it became this thing where I believed I was good, but I believed that I wasn't good enough. And I believed that every time somebody would tell me something good about myself, that it would just be this thing where, yeah, you think that I'm good because X, Y, Z, but wait till you see my grades. Or you think that I'm good because of this, but wait till you see that. And for a lot of my life, this was the pattern. And so it created this constant striving to do more and to do more and to do more. And I went and, you know, I tell people all the time, I consider myself a career renaissance man. Some people may say that I have career ADD, but like I said, I graduated from the University of Illinois with 2 degrees, studied abroad. I also minored in Spanish during that period of time. I went and got a master's degree in teaching, and I taught school for 6 years. I taught Spanish. And I also coached basketball. I did all of these things. I started a business during that period of time. But nonetheless, I was still striving, still trying to be good enough. And it was this weird space of, at my core, at my heart, I knew that I had talent, that I was capable, that I was intelligent, that I was all of these things, but I never felt good enough. My self-worth was never there. It never felt like, I was trying to believe something that my parents had instilled in me, because my parents were amazing. They were always telling me how amazing I was, how capable I was, all the rest of that. I didn't come from a background where people were constantly telling me that I wasn't good enough. On the contrary, I came from a background where people were always telling me that I was good enough, but I was never feeling good enough. I was always feeling like they just don't know. If they only knew how messed up I was, then they wouldn't say what they say. And it took really getting to my capstone moment. I left teaching. I went to law school. I graduated with honors from the University of Illinois College of Law. And I also joined the Marine Corps as a Marine Corps officer. And in that space, when I had kind of reached the pinnacle of what I wanted to do and those feelings were still there, one of the things that I started to understand was it was me that was the issue. Everywhere I went, people were amazed with the work that I did, but I always had a problem. And when I learned how to look at myself and understand, and this was the key understanding that came through, it was that people were not in awe of what I'm doing because they were unaware of my flaws. On the contrary, people were in awe of what I was doing because they could see my flaws and they could see me accomplishing in spite of them. And that is why people were actually excited about what I was able to do. And I realized,
hold on a second. Not to cut you off, but because the curiosity is just flowing through me as you're talking. How did you arrive to that point? How did you arrive to that point that you knew that?
Yeah, it was one of those things where I had achieved what I wanted to achieve. I had become one of the winningest defense counsels in the history of the base, Camp Lejeune, where I was stationed. I had become a company commander, and I had gotten an award, and all of these things had happened. Like I said, I started a couple of businesses. I started an Amway business that did pretty decent, and then I went and I started a jiu-jitsu school that also did very well. And so I kept accomplishing everywhere I went when I would set my mind to accomplishing. And so it came to a point where I couldn't continue to tell myself the lie that I wasn't good enough.
Yes.
But I still had the feeling. So now, factually, I knew that this wasn't the case. Like I had checked enough boxes that I had convinced myself that I wasn't bad, but I still had the feeling that the other shoe was going to drop at some point. And it was that cognitive dissonance. It was that situation of, this feeling is here, even though it's not supported, that made me really go internal. I did a lot of meditation. I did a lot of studying, a lot of reading. And when I started reading a lot of books about people who had done a number of things, a number of extremely important things. When I read about, the biographies of Benjamin Franklin, the biographies of George Washington, the biographies of Abraham Lincoln, the biographies of great people in the world, and I realized that a lot of them suffered with a similar kind of plaguing, nagging question of whether they had done enough. And then all of them in their lives reached this point where they realized I had done enough, and then things changed. And then they did even more. And that was the thing that was most interesting, most intriguing to me. And I realized that for me, it was, I had to believe that I was who everybody was telling me I was, who I felt God was telling me I was. I had to actually believe it, instead of constantly treating myself like I wasn't good enough. And then once I accepted that I was good enough, it didn't mean that I didn't have anywhere to grow. It didn't mean that I was better than other people. I saw this, and I can't remember the movie that I saw it in, but I've heard it a number of times since, and it resonated so well. Know this, that nobody in the world is better than you, but you're not better than anybody else. Everybody is equal, and that's perfectly fine. But don't treat other people like they deserve more than you, like they're better than you. And similarly, don't hold yourself up like you're this, special person. And that kind of idea of you're worthy right where you are. And in all honesty, there was a story that I read in the Bible that changed how I saw all of these things. And it was interesting because it's a story that everybody knows, a story that I've read numerous times. But remember, I told you I'm a recovering perfectionist. And one of the things that kind of led to that perfectionism was, as I grew up and learned about Jesus, one of the big things that people always kind of focused on was Jesus was perfect and you'll never be as good as Jesus, right?
That's right.
And that always bothered me, because there was one of these things where Jesus said, I'm going to my Father, and these works that I do, you shall also do, and even greater works than these shall you do. And so there was this interesting thing of, people had put a limit on what we could be and how good we could be. And so for me, it made me stress about getting as close to perfect as possible, but yet still knowing that I would, quote unquote, never be there. And then I got to understand that perfection doesn't exist, that it's all about excellence. It's all about growth. It's all about improving and going and growing.
Yeah.
And what was interesting, the story that I learned was, or the story that I reheard with new eyes, it was like scales fell off my eyes, was the story of the prodigal son. And, in the normal telling of the story, the prodigal son goes and he's haughty and he's stupid and he goes and he's like, I want my inheritance now. And so he goes, right? It's like that J.G. Wentworth commercial. It's my money and I want it now, right? And so he goes off and he squanders the money. He does everything that you're not supposed to do. And of course, he gets all the bad things that are supposed to happen when you do everything that you're not supposed to do. And he wakes up seeing himself in a swine pen, and he's like, oh my God, look at my life. It is horrible. The servants at my father's house live better than I live right now. Maybe my father will take me back as a servant because I have forfeited my right to be a son. And that was the piece of the story that was always there to me. And in the story, the idea was, yes, he had forfeited his right to be a son, and the father was so gracious that he took him back anyway. And, as punctuated by the other good son that was there, was like, wait, he just did all this stuff, you gonna take him back? And the interesting thing that happened, that was how I always learned the story, that he had actually lost his sonship, and that only because the father was so great had he gained his sonship back, and that it wasn't right, it was just the father's greatness. The whole story, as I learned it growing up, was this was a expose on how amazing the father was, which, of course, when you look at it, when you have perfectionism, you're like, yes, you're amazing and I suck. That's the basic idea, right?
Yes.
What was interesting about when I read this story, and again, I was probably 35 or 36 when I got this kind of revelation. When I read the story again, what I realized was the father came out and said, hey, everybody, we're throwing a party. My son who was lost is now here. My son who is dead is now alive. And what was amazing was the father in the story is the only one who understood the reality of the situation. The son believed that the son had lost his birthright, had lost his who he was. He believed that because of what he had done, he was a different person. The older son, the good son, also believed that because of what the son had done, he was a different person. The father was the only one that reminded everybody that it don't matter what you do, it don't matter where you go, you are my child. That relationship never changed.
It doesn't change.
Couldn't lose it. It's not that you lost it and got it back because they were so gracious. It was that it never went away. You were always my son. You were lost, but you were my son who was lost. You were dead even. You were my son who was dead. Your status changed vis-a-vis where you are. It didn't change vis-a-vis the relationship. And when I realized that, right, when you look at the first page of the Bible, it says that in God's image we are created. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
Let us make man and give him dominion over everything. And in male and female created he them. In the image of God we are created. God breathed life into us. We are children of God. And that's at our best and at our worst. A lot of times people are like, at our worst, we're not worthy. And then something happens and we become sort of pseudo worthy, maybe, but as long as God is just liking us. And that was the prison that I lived in with self-worth for so long. And what I realized was I am worthy, period. It's a full statement, full sentence. Now, the issue is, can I see me like God sees me?
That's right.
And the more that I can see me like God sees me, the more that I can walk in my gift, the more that I can walk in the greatness that is within me, the better an experience of this life I will have. But don't get it twisted. Just because your experience of life is not necessarily where you want it to be, because there are natural consequences to everything that we do, that doesn't change who you are. That doesn't change your worth. That doesn't change your value. That doesn't change any of that. That is a direct, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You are going to do something and there's going to have a reaction to it. That doesn't change who you are. That changes what you did. And if you change what you do, you will change what you get. But you have to first understand who you are, because you have to be the person that does the things to have what you want to have.
All right, we're going to pause there. Okay, listeners. I don't know about you, but that was a lot. And I just want to pause and just take it in. We just heard a word. I love my guests. I was listening, and as I'm hearing you talk about imposter syndrome and how you're breaking it down, even as I'm watching you speak, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, am I worthy of such amazing guests? Like, you're talking about imposter syndrome. You're sharing the story of not feeling good enough. And as you're talking about it in this moment, I'm like, wow. So let's do this. Let's talk a little more about imposter syndrome, because I know one of the things you said is you did have a pivotal point where there was a shift that happened and you were starting to believe that you're the person everyone else sees. You're the person God created you to be. What my question is, Robert, is that fleeting? Does that come and go? Like, once you struggle with that, is that something you kind of always struggle with? Or has it been sustained? Tell us a little bit more.
That's a phenomenal question. That's a phenomenal question. And the answer is yes and no. Right? It depends. A classic lawyer answer. The basic thing that I realized was self-worth and your mental strength is just like your physical strength. If you put bad food in your body and you don't work out and you smoke and you drink alcohol in excess and you do all types of different things, you're not going to be able to do the things that you need to do with your body.
Right.
The same is true of your mind. And so often we think that self-worth is just kind of this idea that we're just going to constantly have static in our minds, but that's not the case. You're constantly being bombarded with all types of different things that are telling you different things. And if you just look at the marketing environment, right, especially for females in our society, marketing is all about making you focus on your pain so that you want to change it, right? That's one of the big things, right? And while that is in the individual sense of things, it's not a bad thing because it's pushing you towards behavior, right? It's pushing you towards behavior modification. And if I am bringing something to you that you need and that I know that is important for you, it's important for you to understand why it's important for you to act now. So I don't want to make it seem like marketing is bad. Marketing is good because marketing is what makes us do the things that we need to do to get out of all of the funk that we need and all the rest of that type of stuff, right?
Talk about it.
But the issue is when you're bombarded with commercial advertisement and marketing in everything that you see day in, day out, what it does is it constantly reminds you of your lack, which in the individual instance is not problematic, but in aggregate, right, it becomes a problem. You throw one pebble at somebody, not a big deal. You throw a million pebbles at somebody, they're going to be hurt.
That's right.
And so it's the same thing with marketing. And so when you realize that that's what's in the environment 24/7, it's imperative that you can't counteract that with advertising of your own, right? And so around my office, I have, affirmations posted on the walls every morning when I do my power hour, which I teach my students. It's about pouring back into me and making sure that I'm full before I start my day, because every day, even if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, there are things that I'm going to do that are going to be draining. There is going to be me pouring into somebody else's cup. The question is, how do you pour into that cup? And I always tell my students, most of us pour like this, and we pour out of us into them.
True.
And what that does is, at some point in time, you're empty and now you need to get refilled.
Yes.
Instead of doing it that way, right? And to your point, how do you keep your mindset? How do you keep everything there? You don't pour from your emptiness. You pour from your abundance. I want you to envision a champagne tower, right? The top glass never is empty after it becomes full. However, it fills all of the other glasses below. Right. That's the idea. That's the concept. Okay. You want to make sure that you're constantly pouring into yourself, even as you go out into the world and pour into others. And if you can do that, then that imposter syndrome goes away, because you're constantly pouring into yourself the remembrance of who you are and what the greatness is. And then the beauty of it is people will begin to pour back into you, and it will rebound because you're pouring into others. And then you get into this virtuous loop where it's very difficult for those messages to even penetrate anymore, because there's so much positivity around that you're seeing.
Brilliantly stated. As you said that, I took a deep breath and an exhale, because I'm really big on meditation and self-care. And I tell you what, so I'm not good with coming up with like clever or like catchy titles. So what you refer to as a power hour, that's my devotional time.
Yes.
And so you're absolutely right. Like even this morning before our interview, like I always kind of confirm the night before, because I want to be able to mentally prepare the next day. And time matters. You got to be able to balance your time. It's so important for me to get that hour in before anything I do that day, but especially before I have an interaction like this. I need to plan the night before. And so I'm gonna steal that from you. I wrote it down.
That's all right. It's not mine. I stole it from Robin Sharma. So you can steal it from me because I stole it from him. And he's a phenomenal productivity and empowerment teacher, and just has a lot of amazing things. And the Power Hour is one of those things that I learned from him and then implemented in my life, and I teach my students.
It is easy to remember. And so what I tell people, even if you don't remember the term itself, you know what to do within that hour.
There you
go. May look different for everybody, but time, like he said, that you're given out of your abundance and not out of your empty. Because how often do we do that?
Exactly.
And then we're drained, and then we retreat, and then we don't want to be bothered with anyone because we allowed ourselves to be depleted.
Exactly. And then we get resentful, and then we get negative and jaded, etc. And that's most of my clients come to me in a state of burnout. They come to me in a state where they have been the extra for everybody for so long, right? Most of my clients, somewhere between 35 and 50 years old, they're professionals, they're high achievers, they're people who are actually capable of doing lots of things. And the thing that's bugging them is the fact that they're not getting the same joy, the same validation, the same affirmation from accomplishing that they used to get. And part
Yeah.
of the reason why is because they've put themselves on the back burner for so long that acute issue has become a chronic problem.
Yes.
And they're starting to feel that resentment, that anger, that dissatisfaction with being the person that everybody depends on, with being the person who everybody knows is going to get it done. When that starts to happen, it creates this fear, because that's their identity. That's who they are.
Yeah.
I'm the person that gets things done. I'm the person that people can count on. I have a reputation,
Which is
right,
a
that
lot of
I've built
pressure.
over time. It's a lot of pressure, especially when you feel like, I don't really even care about that anymore.
Yes. Well, let's do this, my friend. So I like to be respectful of your time, and I'm looking at the clock. And one of the things I would like to do for our guest, listening to you, Robert, there's no doubt you are brilliant. You are highly educated. You are highly intelligent. You
Thank
are
you.
highly educated. You know your stuff. Like, you are the man. And in my language, you are the bomb.
Why, thank you. I will receive and accept that.
Yes, and I do believe in giving people their flowers while they're living. But one of the things I really like to do is allow guests to kind of be vulnerable, because when they see you, it don't matter that you talked about you struggle with self-worth, because when they look at you and they see you today, they only see excellence. They only see greatness. And so what I want you to do is give us a specific time or a specific example of where that lack of self-worth really hurt you negatively.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And there's a number of instances throughout throughout that period of time, like I said, from really high school to about my mid 30s. And one instance in particular, so for example, you heard me say I graduated from high school at 16. But one of the interesting things about that, during that period, I got a D plus in college algebra one semester. Now, that D plus then dropped my GPA. And so I wound up having, and it doesn't count as a pass in the honors track for math. So I had to take algebra 2 in my senior semester in order to make up that math credit. And of course, I got an A in algebra 2. I was in calculus at the same time. So it wasn't an issue whether I could get a good grade, but it meant that I couldn't be in choir for that final semester, which was one of the things that I love to do. And it also meant that that D came back to haunt me, because in order to graduate and get an honors diploma, you had to have a 3.0 GPA graduating. Now, we didn't have weighted grades, so it didn't matter that I took AP history and AP English and AP math and all the rest of those things. My A or my B or my C or my D counted just the same as the kid that took, algebra 1, their junior year in high school, right? Like, it didn't matter. And so I graduated high school with a 2.98 GPA. And because I graduated with 2.98 GPA, I was not eligible for the honors diploma that I was doing all of those things for, that I was taking the extra math class. That was the only reason I was doing that, was because to be eligible for the honors diploma. So I missed that honors diploma. Now, still had great scores on my standardized test, still got into University of Illinois. And again, 16, going to college, got an A on my first paper, but part of that kind of rebellious, jaded nature of it was I got an A on my first paper in school at 16 when everybody said college was hard. So then I proceeded to not take college seriously, even though I got pretty, I got a double degree, and I got a minored in Spanish and studied abroad. Those were all compensatory things because my GPA was a 2.43, I think, when I graduated.
Okay.
So again, I was stuck in this space of, everybody thought that I was smart, and I thought that I was smart, but I couldn't show it. I couldn't prove it. I couldn't do the thing that mattered, quote unquote, to me, right? And it didn't matter to most everybody else, but I felt like it mattered because it was the one thing that I couldn't get. This was the perfectionism, again, rearing its ugly head. And I continued to steal the joy of the accomplishments that I would make because of the fact that I was holding myself to a perfect standard. And I remember when I finally learned to understand how to think about it differently. And again, it wasn't until I was in my mid 30s. I was actually training for a marathon. Now, mind you, I hate running, like, with a passion. But as a Marine, you're in a running organization. There's so many people that have run the marathon. It's crazy. Like 0.5% of the general population has run a marathon. Probably 10 or 15% of the Marine Corps has run a marathon, just to give you an idea of how much Marines are runners. And I always struggle with running. And the system of doing good work, but undercutting it and stealing the victory was continuing it to promote itself. And I remember, and I tell this story to a lot of my students because this is the quintessential story of when I figured it out. I was going out for a run, and now I'm going, and this is an 8-mile run as I'm training for the marathon. Now, mind you, before I started training for the marathon, 8 miles was probably the longest I had ever run in my life. This was a midweek run. I had a 12-mile run that I had to run on the weekend. So this is a midweek. I don't feel like running at all. It's like mentally, I'm forcing myself to make sure that I do my run because I got to train, but I don't want to run at all. Zero desire to run. So I go out and I start running, and I'm reluctantly just running, right? Nothing. I'm not trying to run fast. I'm not paying attention to time, nothing. I'm just out there running. All I'm gonna do is run. That's my mindset. I get about 2 miles in. I'm like, okay, my body's warmed up and it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. All right, let's go ahead. So I speed up a little bit. And by the time I get to mile 6, mile 7, I'm actually like, oh, this actually feels pretty good. I still got more. Let's go ahead, push. And I push and I run faster my last 2 miles than I ran any of the miles before that. So I get to the end of the run and I'm excited. I'm like, man, I had energy at the end of 8 miles. I thought I was going to be beat. All this type of stuff. I'm on an emotional high, right? And immediately my perfectionism starts clicking in, and it's like, yeah, but you see how you got all this energy. That means you didn't train hard enough. That means you could have ran harder earlier. You could have done better. You could have done, and that's the voice that was in my head. But I caught it in this moment, and I realized it was like, wait a minute, that I could have done better is a realization, is a fact. I had more energy than I believed I had.
Okay.
But the question is, what do we do with that fact? What is the story that we tell ourselves? Now, my mind at that point in time, and this is when the transition was beginning to happen, at that point in time, my mind would normally tell me your past performance is unsatisfactory because you could have done better. That's what my mind used to tell me. And that's where it would undercut my ability to see that I was actually worthy.
Makes sense.
But there was a different story that came about this time. And this is the story that I continue to tell myself as we go forward when I come into these moments where I realize that what I did was not the best that I could do. And that story is, oh my God, the future is going to be so amazing because now I know that I'm capable of more than I knew I was capable of before. And so instead of stealing the victory of what I accomplished when I didn't know, I can look forward to the future with anticipation and excitement because now I know. And Maya Angelou said this, and it's such an amazing quote that I hope everybody takes to heart, because this is literally the quintessential understanding of what everything I've been talking about for this past hour. What she said is, give yourself grace for what you didn't know. Because when you know better, you do better.
That's what she said.
And that is the space. So for those people that are struggling in that moment where you're feeling like nothing you do is good enough and you can't get that negative voice out of your head, understand that it is true that you could have done better. That's not a false statement. Don't try to positive mentally think yourself out of that reality. No, it's true. You could have done better. That's the reality that you come to. But now you have learned, and in the future, you know that you're capable of more. So you won't believe that you're not capable of more. So you won't feel like you're not capable of more. You're now understanding what the reality is versus what you thought it was. Because here's the reality at the beginning of that run for me. I did not want to run at all. So the fact that I ran 8 miles was an amazing accomplishment.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I wasn't going to do it at all. And I did it. Now, the beauty of it is when I don't feel like doing it at all the next time, I can remember how I felt this time when I didn't feel like doing it at all. And I can look with anticipation about how good this run is going to be, even though I don't feel like doing it at all. So I don't got to feel bad for not feeling like doing it at all, because even when I don't feel like I want to do it, I'm still capable. I'm still worthy. I still have that ability within me. And that's the same for everybody that's out there listening. Understand that even when you're at your worst, even when you don't feel like doing anything, you still have that greatness within you. It hasn't gone anywhere. No, it's still there.
That's right. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a period. Robert, that was a word.
Well,
And typically at the wrap up, I'll ask, like, what advice would you give a person who struggles with self-worth, et cetera, et cetera? Not necessary.
it's like I read your notes, huh?
Not going there. Yeah. But what I will say, um, someone with your skills and qualifications, and I'm asking this probably more personally,
Mm-hmm.
gosh, like, do other people struggle with you? Like when I hear you, like even when I hear your works,
Mm-hmm.
when I hear your challenges compared to the average person, they wish they had those problems or they wish they had those struggles. And so I'm thinking, do you struggle like with other people not liking you because of the great call that you have in your life?
No, and that was the thing that I used to worry about. And here's the thing that I will say: I have a friend of mine. Her family immigrated from Ethiopia, and so we'll always talk about things. And one of her phrases that I love is when she's complaining about something, she'll be like, "So just so you know, I'm talking about first world problems today." And it's important for us to all recognize that our problems are relative, right? Yeah. And oftentimes what we'll say is, well, I wish I had those problems. Yeah, until you have them.
Until you have them, yeah.
And the reason why is because any problem, the way that it affects us is because of the fact that we don't know how to deal with it. So it doesn't matter if you're dealing with being hungry, which I've dealt with too, right? I've dealt with sleeping on my grandmama's floor my senior year of high school and all the rest of that type of stuff. But those weren't things that, the reason they didn't affect me the same is because there was still love in the house. There was still all the rest of that. And it wasn't me that was failing, right? Yeah. I could look at what my parents were struggling with, and that was their struggle. That wasn't because of me. That wasn't, I did something wrong, right? Even though I endured and lived through a lot of those things, right? And I dealt with bullying, I dealt with a whole bunch of other stuff, but those types of things didn't affect my mental space because of the fact that I didn't see it as my flaw, right? Somebody else wanting to fight or being stupid, all the rest of that type of stuff, that was their issue, right? I know that I'm nice. I know that I treat people well. Like, I know that you got an issue because of you. But when I failed, that was a whole different thing for me. Now, for some people, they're dealing with things that are external that they're taking in and taking them as their own. It creates the same dynamic, which is, I don't know how to solve this. I don't know how to remove this obstacle. I don't know how to move this thing out of space. And what I've noticed for me is that when I deal with other people, what I always try to do is, it's not about me. Now, we spent this conversation talking about me as a guest on your show, but normally when I'm talking to my clients, we're not talking about me. We're talking about you.
Absolutely not.
We're dealing with what's going on with you, because for you, that's the most important problem that you have to deal with. It doesn't matter whether I think that it's a big problem or a small problem, right? It doesn't matter whether it would bother me or stress me. It's stressing you. And that's the thing that is most important to me as a person in general. Again, as a leader, I'm looking at the greatness that someone has in them, and I'm trying to facilitate that manifestation. I'm trying to make that manifestation easier. It doesn't matter if it would be easy for me. I'm not doing it. I have to figure out how to make it easy for you. And that's the kind of tack that I take as a coach and as a consultant. And so I don't generally come into situations where people are comparing themselves to me, because we don't spend a lot of time talking about me, except for when I'm asked to.
like right now. And so that's why I asked. And do you have a few moments for us?
I do.
Yes. So the reason why I asked is, you're right. I'm talking to Robert, the person, Robert, the human, not Robert, the leader, the consultant. And so because of my own personal struggles, so having my own struggles with self-worth, getting to that point of believing what God sees in me, getting to the point of showing up and being confident and being courageous, but then having peers or friends or other people look at me as if I think I'm somebody or like I'm better than. And so when I said I was asking personally and even selfishly, I was talking to Robert the person, not Robert the leader, because if someone already kind of struggles with self-worth and confidence, I know a past guest has stated that if you struggle with that, then you don't need to hang around people who triggers that.
Exactly.
In other words, like, you need to hang around confident people, or you need to hang around courageous people, but that's not always the case.
Yes, no, and I think that's there's stages of the journey, right? I
Yes,
think that oftentimes, and especially for us as African Americans, one of the things that we constantly feel is this tug to give back before we've actually fully gotten out,
that's
before we've
right.
actually healed. And there's one of those things that it's so important to realize that when you're on your journey and you're learning, learn.
Hmm.
Get to a point where you have a period of stability, of comfort. I spent 15 years proving, doing, transforming my vision and my idea of who I was before I ever started coaching and before I ever started dealing with adults who were dealing with this. Now I taught children, I taught, right? But I'm 15 years removed from where they were. Even when I taught high school, I was 7, 8 years out of high school teaching people who were going through what I went through 10 years ago.
Sure.
And it's important to realize that oftentimes we get out and immediately we want to reach back and try to pull our friends out without realizing that we was barely strong enough to get ourselves out.
That's
You've
right.
got to go and build up your strength before you try to pull somebody else out. And so if you have somebody that struggled with self-worth and now they've gotten it and you're in that space where people are looking at you and people are saying things, that's the space where you need to go and be around people who are going to be comfortable with your shine and even edify your shine, because you need to be in that space and know what that looks like long enough to then you can go and take your light back into the darkness.
Ah, that's what I was looking for. That's what I needed to hear, because I think our guests need to hear that. And so I want to thank you just for all your wisdom and your knowledge. But before I let you go, what I've been doing in season 2 is ending things on a really high note or a light note. Like, we didn't really go deep per se in terms of emotional type of interview, but it got deep in terms of knowledge. And so, where is your happy place, Robert? When you need a stress reliever, when you need to escape the pressures of life, what is it that you enjoy? And let me tell you why I'm asking. So for me, it's desserts. Now, ideally, if I could escape, I would love to go to the ocean. I would love to go to an island. I would love to just go somewhere that is soothing and kind of serene. But we know that you can't always escape. And sometimes you have to take staycations. Sometimes I can't plan the mental health day. I just need something to retreat and recharge. And so for me, a lot of times it's getting one of my favorite cupcakes or favorite dessert, watching a lighthearted movie. So what is that place for you, or what is that thing for you?
That's a really good question. I think that I have a number of different things that I like to do to get into those spaces, to kind of disconnect. I've always loved to get into a book, because I've always, growing up, I love the fact that you could travel anywhere you wanted to just by grabbing a book. So reading and specifically fantasy reading, like I love all the Harry Potter series, Lord of the Rings, any of those types of books. I've read all of those series. That's really fun for me. I loved to play video games when I was younger. And so I still will every once in a while just play a game and do something. I also love to be active. So jiu-jitsu is fun for me. Basketball is something that I love. Playing golf is something that I love. And just a lot of times also just sitting and watching movies with my kids, with my wife and my kids, just being in the space, watching something nostalgic, watching something. I love sharing movies that I loved when I was younger with my children and seeing them see it for the first time. So those are some of the things that I do. But I think that the most important thing that I do when I need to get away, and not because like there's the different, like there's the angry need to get away, and then there's the just kind of overwhelmed or need to rest. And one of the big things that I try to do is I try to be intentional about rewarding the work that I do. And so instead of feeling like I get away, I feel like here's what I did, and now I get to enjoy my rest time. And so it becomes time that I look forward to instead of something that I feel like I do to get away from everything else. And so during my days, I actually going to work, I'm doing what I love, but it does take energy out of me, and it doesn't always pour back in reciprocally, right? But it's still something that I love, because I love helping people to manifest their greatness. I love helping people with their problems, but it is sometimes draining, holding that space for people to grow. But the beauty of it is when I get finished doing that, I get to look forward to resting.
Agreed.
As a reward for having done what I was supposed to do. And it changes the dynamic in my mind so that I don't look at tiredness or fatigue as something to be avoided. It's kind of like when I would go run or when I would go do a workout. It's what you're supposed to feel after having done a good workout. And so you've earned your rest. You've earned that cupcake. You've earned that dinner. You've earned whatever it is that you're doing to rest. And you can feel good about both of them. Because a lot of times I know what used to happen to me was I would feel guilty about the stuff that I like to do to rest.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
And so in order to change that, I had to change why I was doing it. I wasn't doing it to get away. I was doing it because I earned it.
That's right.
And I was acknowledging the work that I did instead of moving the goalposts and like I was trying to do with that run and saying, well, you should have ran harder. No, I shouldn't. I should have done exactly what I did. And now I get to be happy about resting because I did more than I was even trying to do.
Nicely stated. Well, Robert, you're such a joy.
Thank you so much. You are
so much fun. It was.
I enjoy you all the time. Your energy, your spirit is just so phenomenal, and I just appreciate you allowing me to share some time with your audience, with your listeners, and I love the environment that you've created for people and being able to hold them up and to put those pillars into their lives so that they can stand strong. So thank you so much for the work that you do, and thank you for letting me be a small part of it.
Absolutely. So, Robert, I just want to encourage you, excuse me, to continue to lead out of authenticity. Thank you for tuning in to Pillar Talk with Rochelle. Authentic people, real stories. Rochelle Armstrong, leading authentically.